Hi guys, welcome to my channel, Windsor Medals. My name's Paul, thanks for checking out this video. I hope you're all well. So this is the second video I'm doing on a series of videos for basic tailoring stitches. So the first one I did was about the basting stitch, and this next video is going to be about felling stitch. Felling stitch is a stitch that I use the most, I'd say. As I've been a military tailor for many years, I'd say definitely it's the stitch that I've used the most. So the felling stitch is for attaching bits of fabric to another bit of fabric, either raw edge or turned over. So we're going to do a demonstration on this bit of fabric attached to this bit of fabric. And also you can turn over a bit of fabric and practice joining them together where they meet on the rolled edge there. So the felling stitch is used for a lot of different things, mainly putting badges on uniforms or badges on berets. And also you can use the felling stitch for small repairs. And it just generally, it's a very useful stitch. So when you're doing a felling stitch, if you want to learn how to do it, it's best to practice before you actually take it to a uniform. So when I did my B3 tailoring course, we did a lot of practicing, and we used to practice on these samples here. On the folded edges here, we used to put the felling stitches in there. We used to use yellow thread, so it's hard to hide the stitch when you're stitching it in there. So when you use felling stitch, you're best using a thread that matches obviously your badge that you're sewing on. So the idea of it is to put a badge on a uniform, and once you've stitched it on, all you see is the badge and you don't see the stitching. The stitches have got to be hidden away. The stitches are very small. So I use sharps, needles. I use a small needle, or no bigger than a medium, for felling stitch. So I can give you a bit of a demonstration on felling stitch now. So I'm going to use yellow thread. So yellow thread's going to be hard to hide, because at the end of the day, when you're doing felling stitch, you want it so your stitches, you can't see them. That's the whole idea of it. So I always use wax on my thread. It prevents it from tangling, makes it a little bit stronger. I'll just thread this needle up, bear with me. It's a small needle, so it's hard to thread, but I've done it in a oneer, so that's good. So always put a knot on the end of your thread to start with. This acts as an anchor for when you pull your thread through, the thread's then anchored in position. So I'll take you back to where I used to start learning how to do felling stitch. By the way, I've just rolled this fabric over and put a basting stitch down to hold it in place. I've done a video on basting stitch if you want to have a look. So like I say, it's the best way of practicing how to do felling stitch. So all you do is you pick up a tiny fibre from the top part of the material or the badge and pull it through, and then directly below where you've come out at the top, you've got to pick a tiny bit of fibre up from the bottom fabric and then move the needle along like just a millimetre and just pick a tiny bit of fabric up and then pull it through, and there's the first stitch going in there. That's the first felling stitch going in there. Because I've put a knot in the end of the material, it's anchored off. So you just keep repeating the process. So where I've come out there, pick a tiny bit of fabric up from underneath, go along a millimetre or a millimetre and a half, pick another bit of fabric up, and then here goes my second felling stitch. So basically all that's happening is these two bits of material are getting pulled together, fastened together. So there's my third stitch going in. So the idea is to try and do it so you hide the stitch. I've not practiced this in a while on a seam like this. So if you keep going down, it's just holding the two bits of fabric together. I'm getting in the groove now. So hopefully as I'm putting these stitches in, they won't be visible. But like I say, it's hard to do with yellow thread because it stands out on the dark material. So like I say, all I'm doing is going down the line, picking up a tiny fibre from the material, going along a millimetre, millimetre and a half, and then just coming up there on the roll. Like so. So the idea is on the roll of that material there, you should not be able to see any stitches. They should all be hidden away. It's very difficult though, you need to practice a lot to be able to hide the stitches totally. If I was using black thread now, obviously you wouldn't be able to see any of the stitches whatsoever. So like I say, this is a felling stitch. I don't know how many stitches I've put in there. What was it, 30, maybe 15, I don't know. So I'll do a close up. You can't really see any stitches there. If I roll the material back, you can maybe just see a stitch. So I've held those two bits of material, fabric together. You can't really see the stitch, and that's what the stitch is for. So like I said, you could do it on joining two bits of material together, whether it's a raw edge or not, or an edge that's been on the overlocking machine to put an edge on it, a machine edge. So I'll just put another knot in this thread and show you this way of doing it slightly different. So I'm going to attach this bit of material to that bit of material. It's basted together. So we start by putting the needle through the top bit of fabric and pulling the knot through, and then where you come out the top, on the bottom bit of material you catch a tiny bit of material, a few fibres there, and then go along a millimetre or two and then pull it. So where you've come out the top, just go in a couple of millimetres, just catch a little fibre of the material underneath and then keep going down. Because the top fabric here is not rolled, it's harder to hide the stitching, so you've got to make them as small as you can. Like I said, if I was using black thread, you wouldn't see the stitches. So you just pick a tiny bit of fibres up on that bottom fabric, then come through the top, about ½ millimetre in, and you just keep going along. So basically you're just attaching that top fabric to the bottom fabric. So you can get the gist of it there. You can see where I've put the tiny little stitches in. Just to show you what I mean, you can see those stitches across the yellow. I've got a bit of black thread here ready to go. So I'll just show you that it'd be invisible. Just put the light on, it's gone a bit dark. Probably see a bit better. Right, okay, so I've got my black thread. I'm gonna pick a bit of the fabric up at the top. Oops, it's come out. Try again. Pick a tiny bit of fibre up just below where you come out, and then go along, putting tiny little stitches in about every millimetre, millimetre and a half. Because I'm using black thread now, you won't see the stitches, they'll be hidden away because they match the fabric and they're very, very tiny. So like I say, from the bottom fabric, you just pick a couple of fibres up, like so, then go into the top fabric, then pull it through, and then repeat the process. Pick a tiny bit of fabric up below, then just go along like so. Just pick a tiny bit of fabric up, go along, then pull it through your top fabric. Right. So you can't hardly see those stitches. You can, if you steamed that now, there's a bit of wax that's making the thread a little bit grey, but if you steamed it, it'd go black and you would not see that at all. There. Right, so basically the felling stitch is a useful stitch. So if you didn't have a sewing machine and you wanted to sew a badge on your combat shirt quick, you could do it by hand using felling stitch. I've basted this badge on already. I've done a video on basting if you want to check that out. I use the sleeve boards on the inside of the shirt before I sew it in, so you don't sew the sleeves together. You can improvise, use like improvised here. It's just a little bit of MDF 3mm thick. It's very cheap, you can get it from most DIY shops. It serves the same purpose. As long as you've got something hard on the inside, it works. So okay, so I've got some black thread here. I'm going to sew this badge on using felling stitch. I've basted it on in the right position. So another little trick to use when you're hand sewing badges onto a uniform is get a bit of tailor's chalk and just mark some points round the badge, like so. So when you're sewing it, you can meet the points up on the badge so you know the badge is not moving. And if it does move, then you can readjust it again. Right, so there's no specific place to start sewing these badges on. You've got to put your fingers inside and then hold it with your thumb on the outside to guide. I'm just going to start here in the centre. So I put the needle about 1mm into the badge. I've got a knot on the end of the thread so it anchors it tight. And then just sort of underneath the badge, just pick a couple of fibres up from the fabric, go along 1mm or 2, and then start sewing. So that's my first stitch. Repeat the process. Just pick a tiny bit of fabric up from where you come out of the top of the badge, and then go along 1mm or so, and then pull your stitch in and just go along like that. And then the whole idea of it is sew the stitches are going to be invisible. All you'll see is the badge and no stitches. As you're going along, just make sure your marks are all lining up and carry on stitching. So like I say, this is the felling stitch. This is a stitch that I use the most in my military tailoring career. It's a very useful stitch. It comes in handy for all different types of sewing. You can obviously machine stitch these badges on. I would normally machine stitch these badges on, but not everybody's got a sewing machine. And then if you want to just quickly do it by hand, this is the method. So just keep going along the badge. And then when you turn the badge round, reposition your fingers and your thumbs so you feel comfortable. Make sure all the marks are all lining up on the badge, and then carry on sewing. So like I say, from wherever you come out, the top of the badge, go directly underneath and just pick a couple of fibres up, sort of underneath the badge, then go a millimetre, millimetre and a half, and then sew. And just keep repeating the process. By the way, I'm using the seam as a guide to make it sure it's nice and straight. So it's a sort of a right angle with a seam at the bottom with the line going across. So I'm coming to the end of the badge now from where I started. Oh no, my thread's just snapped. Sorry, bear with me 2 seconds. Re-thread the needle. Hopefully it'll thread up quick. Yeah, straight away. So, like I say, I'm coming to the end of the badge. So where I started, I'm just gonna go over that starting point a few stitches just to anchor it down so it doesn't come loose and come off. And then just to finish off, I'm just gonna grab a bit of the badge, wrap the thread around the needle 2 times, 3 times, then just pull it tight and snap it off. So that's absolutely solid on there. So you take your basting stitch out, okay, so to finish that off, you just blow a bit of steam through it, give it a brush, and then that would be sewn on there, solid, secure, neatly. And if you look, hopefully you can't see any stitching visible because they're all so small, it's black thread. All you see is the badge on there. Nice little job that.